Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Reserve Team podcast. My name is Branson Gibson. I'm the host this week. The Reserve Team, your home of all things Australia and New Zealand football. We've got a big show ahead of us this week. I'm not going to go through the show on my own. I am joined this week by a couple of guests. First up, we have Nick Gerber making his Reserve Team podcast debut. G'day, Nick. How's it going?
Yeah, good, thanks. I'm glad to be on the podcast. It's what I've wanted since I was a little boy.
Oh, fantastic. Great to hear. Hopefully we can live up to those expectations. We are also joined as well. He's a veteran of the Reserve Team podcast by now, I reckon. Stephen Paletti, good day, Stephen. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm not too bad. A veteran with all of 3 appearances. Yeah, sounds like some A-League squads.
Sounds good. Well, at least you didn't almost say good evening when it's the middle of the day, so it could be worse.
Good evening.
Yeah, tried to save that one. I think I've done well there. We've got a big show ahead of us, gentlemen. Today we are going to be talking about the Asian Champions League. There is plenty to unpack on this one, plenty of big results to talk about. Of course, we're going to focus on the Australian teams and how they've gone in their recent Asian Champions League campaign. Straight off the bat, Nick, what are you looking forward to talking about in this episode?
Yeah, look, it's been really good. It's really good to get some football in us, to be honest. Get some live football in. It's been ages, hey? So yeah, it's been really enjoyable and some good performances too. So keen to dig into that.
And how about you, Stephen? As a Sydney FC fan, I'm looking forward to a few hot takes on their Asian Champions League campaign. Just quickly, what are you looking forward to as a whole in breaking it down?
So Costa's going to get us a few mentions that might upset a few people. Look, overall, it's, as Nick said, it's been good to get some football back into us. My work schedule hasn't exactly been friendly to watching Perth and Victory games, so I've just been watching highlights and mini matches of those. So, overall, it's been good to have football back, and I can't wait for the season to kick off in about 3 weeks' time.
Fantastic. Well, we've got a pretty mega show ahead of us. We'll take a look at each team's in detail, but let's get started. And straight off the bat, we are going to talk about Sydney FC. So it's been a bit of an interesting campaign for Sydney, sort of a story of missed opportunities. Taking a look at their results as a whole, they only have one win, a recent mega win, a 4-0 defeat over Shanghai SIPG. Outside of that, they had 3 losses and a draw. They still have one game to play at time of recording. They sit on the bottom of their group. Stephen, straight off the bat, mate, what have you made of Sydney's campaign so far?
Okay, so slight correction. They don't sit on the bottom of the group.
Don't they? Oh, yes.
They're sitting third on goal differential.
Oh, beg your pardon.
With -2. Jeonbuk are at -4 and at the bottom of the group. And the only thing separating SIPG and Sydney FC is not goal differential, because they both share a -2 differential. It's 5 points. So there's that. So what I've made of Sydney FC's performances so far is I might work my way backwards and start with the most recent game, the 4-0 game against SIPG. What the hell was that? It was a great performance, but why the hell? Where was it 2 weeks ago? Why?
Yeah, great question.
Why can they put on that performance and actually display the finishing they need to display once they've already been mathematically eliminated from the group? Is it just the pressure's off? But surely, if you're looking at the Asian Champions League as a whole, because the Australian sides aren't expected to do well, the pressure should be off the entire time, realistic.
Well, taking a look at that game as well, it does seem to reek of too little, too late. Trent Bahagia scored a brace, Alex Wilkinson and Luke Braden also on the score sheet too. So what were the things that you noticed from that game specifically that were missing in earlier campaigns? Was it simply the finishing and making the most of those opportunities, or did you notice anything else?
So I think that definitely the finishing was a key one. The team seemed to share the workload around a lot more. That was one thing that I picked up on in the first SIPG game of this campaign, was the team started to fall away towards the end. That never looked like happening in this game against SIPG. Everyone knew what their role was. Everyone played well. Ewan Hoff played excellently with Luke Bratton. Also, what is it about Sydney FC number sixes and scoring goals from outside the box that's still arising as they hit the back of the net? That's like the third one in the last 2 years.
Oh, it was a good try. I don't know. You tell me.
The beautiful strike.
Have you got any key data on that, Nick? On shots outside of the box, just Sydney scoring bangers?
Oh, I'll casually dig that one up as we go.
Yeah, but so Nick, what did you make of the Shanghai game? Because I believe you watched it as well, right?
Yeah, I did. I thought it was very impressive. Neuenhoff, as Stephen mentioned, he performed really well. He seems to offset Bratton quite well. I think him and Rattray look like they've got kind of a battle on to see who can really cement that place. But yeah, as Stephen said, the finishing came back. I think Buhaja played quite well, just creating the opportunities and getting them on the break and, just making the most of the opportunities. I think Sydney did well.
And taking a look at the games prior to that, so it was a 1-0 loss to Jeonbuk Hyundai and a 2-1 loss to Shanghai SIPG. The story of those games really were sort of missed opportunities. Sydney seemed to control possession, at least play the kind of game style that they wanted to. They created a lot of chances, but just simply could not put the ball in the back of the net. Stephen, as a fan, how frustrating was it watching those games?
It is incredibly frustrating. I did write a piece after the first SIPG game, 5 questions to ask from the game, and you can check that out on the reserve team website. But I'll come to that in a sec. But looking at the Jeonbuk game, Sydney FC had 54% of the ball, 19 shots to 11, 7 corners, 17 free kicks. They only gave away 11 fouls. They were caught offside twice, but overall, the base stats seem to indicate that they dominated that game, and that's exactly what happened. They dominated the game, and yet they conceded just before halftime, and that was basically all she wrote. There was nothing that could be done. Finishing is an issue, and Costa, I know Costa is not your typical number 9 striker. He's definitely a setup guy. He plays more as an advanced attacking midfielder, basically. But if Sydney had to do well, not only in Champions League, but do well in the A-League, Costa needs to be able to finish some of the strikes that he's been missing. And what he's been doing, it's not good enough, especially with the fact that he's taking up a foreigner spot. He just doesn't seem like he's contributing overall to the team. Maybe there's stuff going on behind closed doors that make him worth the money that he's on, but on the surface, it just seems like Costa shouldn't be there. And for what it seems like this campaign is that Sydney have gone with the let's play Costa into form approach. And
well, Nick, how much do you think Sydney missed Le Fondre, in particularly in those 2 games when they couldn't put the ball in the back of the net, and Le Fondre obviously a prolific goal scorer? Did that sort of show how badly they need a striker, in your opinion?
Yeah, 100%. I think Le Fondre scored, I think, 21 goals last season, and you don't get that from being just he's a good finisher. And I think if you go back and watch some of the clips of the goals that he scored, they're just insane. Like first touch finishes into the top corner, just running, like his positioning, his shooting, it was just all fantastic. So I suppose it's not a huge surprise to me that, the 2 strikers, Buhaja and Barbarouses, when they come in, it's difficult to fill in those boots because obviously he was so good and so clinical for Sydney. Yeah, but I definitely think there's room for another striker in the Sydney lineup.
Stephen, I've got a couple more questions for you from a fan sort of perspective. So what have you made from the campaign as a whole? I mean, do you see it as a failure, considering that you came off the league double here in Australia? And I know you mentioned they're not on the bottom of the group. I would just like to clarify here, the AFC Champions League website has stitched me up here. They have Sydney in 4th spot, despite, as you said, having a better goal differential to Jeonbuk. So they stitched me up there. But going back to it, has this campaign been a failure?
I would say yes. And for all the reasons it's a failure, I would also love to be able to use them to discredit victory. But I can't, unfortunately. The fact of the matter is that Sydney have always prioritised the league, especially over the last few seasons. They prioritised the league in the final series, which means that Asian Champions League commitments have sort of taken a back seat, especially given that as you get to the pointy end of the A-League campaign, as you lead into finals. That's when most of the group stage games are being played. So it's just been one of those things where you didn't have that distraction this time. It was in Qatar. It was in a hub. Literally, the only thing Sydney had to focus on was putting out results on the field and advancing out of the group. There's no outside distractions, and they couldn't do it. It's something that should have been done if Sydney were going to go deep and in the Champions League. And I say deep, but meaning getting to the knockout stages. This was the season to do it, especially given that they've kept most of their squad since last season. Only real noticeable absences are Lafondra, or East Lafondra, I should say. So there's that cohesion in the group amongst the squad, and so it should have been quite simply get out of the group. You've taken it to SIBG before. You can hang with them. So I think you have to ask why. Was it simply not a goal of the team to get out of the group? Was it, hey, look, we're showing up because we have to, and we'll play enough that essentially this is a glorified preseason tournament? That's a question I'd be asking.
Well, just to sort of follow up on that, because so you mentioned Sydney prioritising the league, and as far as the domestic game goes, they've pretty much accomplished everything there is to accomplish, with premierships, finishing on top, dominant seasons, all that. As a fan, does it annoy you that that success hasn't continued on the continental stage, especially considering that your arch rivals, the Western Sydney Wanderers, won the competition? Does that irk you that the club don't seem to prioritise that sort of continental success?
Yeah, it really does. I don't know how the team goes about fixing it because league success is important because it's what gets you back to the Champions League. It's the only way Australian teams qualify for the Champions League. Obviously in Europe, you've got the fact that you win you win the whole thing, you get an automatic entry into next year. But, you don't have that in Asia, so you have to do well in the league in order to get back into the Champions League. And essentially it's just a rinse and repeat. Like the season that Sydney got out of the knockout stages, or got to the knockout stages, was a 7th place finish in the league in 2015-16. And so their entire season rested on actually doing well in Champions League. Could it be a coincidence that Sydney then went out in 16-17 and absolutely dominated every single team in the country because they didn't have to worry about Champions League, especially towards the pointy end? Maybe, but I'd want to see Sydney doing well in Asia, especially since you mentioned the Wanderers. They've done it. Adelaide have gone deep. Victory, in the knockout stages. Sydney can't be the team that dominates domestically but can't do it in Asia. It's got to become more of a priority, but I just don't know how you go about doing that. Maybe the realignment of the domestic campaign with the move to winter that's been touted helps Sydney in that regard. But yeah, it becomes critical that Sydney start to do well in Asia. Otherwise, we're going to get left behind the rest of the country. And for a team and a club that demands as much success as Sydney does, that's unacceptable.
Interesting. And just while we've been discussing this, our reserve team fact checkers have been working hard in the background. As far as the Champions League goes, the table actually goes on head-to-head rather than goal difference. So in that regard, who is it? Sorry, that is above Sydney. Sorry. So in that regards, Jeonbuk do have one over Sydney. So the AFC Champions League table have not stitched me up. Apparently, Sydney are correctly on the bottom. Thank you to our reserve team fact checkers working hard in the background. No, all good. I have no idea how the group stage sorts out. So, that's all right. We got there in the end. Nick, what are your takeaways from Sydney's campaign as a whole? One win from 5 games so far, and their one remaining game is against Yokohama F. Marinos, who sit on the top. So not too sure if that one will go out in Sydney's favour. But what are your takeaways of the campaign as a whole?
Yeah, I suppose as not a fan of Sydney, I don't have that emotional pull of disappointment in the results. And for me my takeaways are that I think Sydney did pretty good. I think the performances were quite good. Obviously, they've got a settled squad. They've been able to introduce youth in this tournament. As Stephen was mentioning, they might have seen it as somewhat a preseason tournament. So it's been really good for them to get stretch their legs out. And I don't know, we've seen, I suppose in terms of style of play, it's quite similar for Sydney. Just I think what was missing was a bit of that finishing touch, really. But yeah, I mean, one other thing is the group that they're in is actually a very competitive group, right? You've got Jeonbuk, who yeah, they won the K League. They've won it 4 seasons in a row. Yokohama F Marinos, they Ange's team. They obviously won the league last season, and SIPG, Shanghai SIPG, they came first in their group in the Chinese Super League, and obviously they've got players such as Hulk, Oscar, and Aaron Boy. So for me, I think I wouldn't be too disheartened by that. I think it's good. It's a great lead-in for the A-League season for Sydney.
Fantastic. And a question for both of you, but I'll start with you, Stephen. You've both mentioned some of the youth players who have been able to get a run in with Sydney. Stephen, who's impressed you the most out of the sort of young emerging players who you have seen have a shot this ACL campaign?
All right, so the cop-out answer here is to go Nieuwenhof, obviously making his professional debut in this campaign and has not looked out of place at all in those 3 games. Taking Nieuwenhof aside, because as I said, that's the cop-out answer, I think Bahaja has shown that he can be a suitable replacement, working with other young players, Ivanovic, Swivel, Wood. You know, Bahaja's probably going to get the majority of the minutes, and that's fine. But like he'll probably get around, I think maybe somewhere between 70 to 80 minutes a game, and Sydney will use their bench the same way they have, which will be 15, 20 minutes to go. But yeah, I think Bahaja's improved his finishing, so yeah, I would have to say Bahaja.
And how about you, Nick?
Yeah, Nieuwenhof is the easy answer. So I'll also have to think of a different one. Yeah, I think Bahaja did really well. The goal that he scored against Shanghai, that was insane. He was sliding in, first time half volley into the top corner. That was ridiculous.
Yeah.
I do think that he's not as sharp as Lafond. So like sometimes, he might try and interplay and it doesn't really come off. His first touch might be a bit loose. So those are things that we'll have to adapt to with Sydney. But yeah, I suppose in terms of defense, Patrick Flotman and Jorking and Ben Warland, I think they've all shown that they're more than capable to sit in the back 4 alongside Wilkinson, while McGowan is still in Scotland and still has the COVID diagnosis. But yeah, I mean, they've shown themselves to be at home. They're good defensively. They're both good on the ball. So yeah.
And what about Tom Howard-Bell? Starting again with you, Nick, what have you made of his campaign? Do you reckon Redmayne has anything to worry about, or is there a sort of a contingency plan there should Redmayne depart? What have you made of his performances?
Yeah, I mean, the headline is obviously his red card that he received. Yeah. That was ridiculous.
But taking that aside, that was sort of, a split decision, obviously a poor one, very wrong. Well, you could actually say it was right. It was going over his head. If he hadn't touched it, probably would have been a tap-in, and Shanghai didn't score. But anyway, taking that aside, what have you made of his performances?
Actually, I think one thing to note is I think the pitches in Qatar, they've been really hard. So what that means is the ball goes really fast, the bounces are high. So I think maybe that one he just kind of got caught off. It was a long ball, and just got caught off guard with that one. But yeah, I think he did really well. His saves, he had some really good saves in that game. And of course, Pavlicic came in and he was really, really solid in the game after that.
And what did you think, Stephen?
Yeah, I think it put it down to a brain snap in terms of Hewett-Bell. The best keepers have made those sorts of brain snaps, especially early on in their career. THB's got a lot of solid fundamentals, so I think, a recovery from that will be fine. Pavlicic has really impressed me. I don't think he's done quite enough to win the first backup job yet from Hewett-Bell, but if Redmayne departs after this season, I think that Sydney's keeping stocks have got a good young future ahead of them.
And finally, one last question before we move on from Sydney for both of you. What has been the biggest positive that you can take away from Sydney's campaign, and what also is the biggest concern? We'll start with you, Nick.
This is a tough one. Let's see.
Sort of throwing you under the bus here.
I'm gonna take a long time to think of this one.
Well, have you got an answer, Stephen?
So the biggest concern, I have 2 of them. So I'm going to recap the campaign a little bit. So we're going to go all the way back to February here. The game against Yokohama F Marinos, the 4-0 loss. I don't think anyone expected Sydney to do well there, including me. So gloss over that one a little bit, but we're going to go to the first game against John Book in March. Being 2-1 up with 15 minutes to go plus stoppage time, including having a player advantage because of the red card, to then go on and lose 2-2 is completely unacceptable. Or not lose 2-2, but draw 2-2. Completely unacceptable. And something that Sydney has struggled with in the past is actually finishing out games in the Champions League. So then we go to the 2-1 SIPG game. Again, it was a game that Sydney absolutely dominated for the first 60 minutes. Should have been 3-0 up, 4-0 up, and ended up losing 2-1, not being able to close out games. Then you got the 1-0 against John Book. We've already talked about that. And then the 4-0 against Shanghai. We've already talked about that. That was the only game they've actually looked like finishing a game and closing out a game, was the game against SIPG. So that's something Sydney needs to drastically improve in terms of continental successes, being able to close out games and grind out the results.
Oh, sorry.
The other negative I wanted to talk about is Costa. I've already mentioned a little bit of that, but yeah, that's something that needs improving and fast. As far as the positives go, is the fact that Sydney have looked better as the campaign's gone on. You know, they've been able to bring the youth in, and they've all slotted in relatively seamlessly. It's showing a lot of good signs for the campaign. You know, when you've always got battle for spots, so you've got Zulo battling with King for that starting left back role. You've got Neuenhoff and Retro battling for that right number 6 role with Bratton. You've got Caceres and Bum Johan, both of whom are both very quality strikers on that right side of the number 10 role. So I think there's a lot of those are the positives to take from it, is that there's battling for spots. Everyone's slotted in seamlessly because of the rigidity of Sydney's system, and that's something I look forward to over the upcoming campaign.
And Nick, you've had a little bit of thinking time now.
Yes,
one positive and one negative.
Yeah, look, I think I'll go with the obvious ones. I think the positives. I think the performances have been pretty good in general. Just a bit lacking in the final third, but yeah, I think the performances have been pretty good. So I suppose this gives them a good runway to get into the A-League season. So that's positive for me. In terms of negatives, they just couldn't get the results, and that I think that's a bit of a shame. I think their performances definitely deserved a bit more than 4 points in the bottom of the group.
Well, there we go. So that sort of wraps up Sydney's Asian Champions League campaign. As we said, they do have one more game still to be played at the time of recording against Yokohama. What we're going to do now, though, is take a very quick sorry, no, we're not. We're going to take a very quick break and jump into our mailbag question. All right, so jumping into our mailbag question this week, it is December, which means that Christmas is not too far away. It's actually just around the corner, and that sort of spurred our mailbag question this week, which is, which A-League kit would sort of best translate into an ugly Christmas sweater? So this is a bit of a broad one here, so we might go for which A-League kit do you reckon would make, you know, the best ugly Christmas sweater as is, and which one do you think, you know, with a couple of adaptations, maybe a little bit of Christmas themery, could really enter that sort of top tier ugly Christmas sweater category? Nick, have you got any contenders for this one?
Yeah, I think Western United's away kit is actually already a Christmas sweater. I mean, you watch them playing with the long sleeves, and they've got all those patterns on them. No work needs to be done. It is already a Christmas sweater.
That's a very good shout. That's a very Christmassy color palette. You know, well done.
Yeah,
what about you, Stephen?
So we're going to take a trip down memory lane here to the 2011-2012 season, and that horrendous Melbourne Victory tradie away kit. The yellow.
Oh, the fluoro yellow.
Yeah, the fluoro yellow and the blue. It just. Every time I see replays or the mini matches on Fox Sports, it just makes me want to poke my eyes out because it is just horrendously bad.
Well, they aren't the only team that's adopted the fluoro yellow. I'm pretty sure Barcelona had a fluoro yellow kit going around. Man City had like the fluoro yellow dip kit. I think it was yellow at the top and then slowly transitioned to pink. My favorite with that kit, though, is if you ever go to a Victory game, you can always spot the fan who's wearing that. You know, like when you look at the fan section, there's like a wall of blue or whatever, and then just sort of speckled around in the sections is always a person in one of those fluoro yellow kits. My nomination for this one is we are going to have to go down memory lane for this as well. Back in, I think it was the 2015-2016 season, the Newcastle Jets wore a special sort of one-off RAFF jersey that had fighter jets on the front. So I actually thought it was quite a groovy jersey at the time, but I think that could be easily adapted for ugly Christmas sweater kind of thing, where instead of fighter jets on the top, you just go reindeer. So that's my nomination for an A-League Christmas-themed ugly sweater. Or, of course, North Queensland Fury. I mean, they looked pretty good. I like the lime green, but I think that whole sort of colour palette can get in the bin and fits quite nicely into the ugly category. So I think we can just sort of throw in Christmas in there as well. A bit of red, as you said, Nick, improve the Christmas colour palette. All right, so jumping into the next Aussie team we're going to take a look at is the Perth Glory. We want to take a look at their Asian Champions League campaign. It's been a difficult one, no doubt about it. It's a winless campaign for the Glory. They finish bottom of their group. Nick, are there any positives that we can take away from this Perth campaign at all?
Yeah, I think for starters, I think it's quite clear that they looked at this as a preseason camp kind of thing. Richard Garcia made some comments about that himself, and he said if it weren't for the quarantines and all that, it would make a perfect preseason. I mean, you're challenging yourself against teams which are really good. So yeah, I think that was really good for them. Aside from that, it was really good to see a young squad come out. So there was a stat in the commentary yesterday where they mentioned how many players were actually from the youth system. I don't actually have that handy with me, but in terms of the minutes getting played by youth team or academy members, it's just fantastic for them. We've seen players like, Baffert, Tatafu, Nick Walsh, Bodnar, and Roland, the 16-year-old right back. You can't get that opportunity to play that many minutes against such competitive opposition. And aside from that, I think one more thing is we've been able to see Fornaroli and Castro, I suppose not at their best. They performed pretty good. I think they were getting their sharpness back up to scratch. Fornaroli scored a really good free kick the other night, and Castro's shown his ability to just get the ball in tight spaces and get it forward.
Well, and just quickly, you've touched on Castro there, so I just want to ask, how big is it for the Glory to have him back in their squad?
Yeah, that's massive. I mean, they lost quite a few players in the off season, and obviously Andrew Naboo didn't manage to cross borders.
Yeah.
And with the squad looking quite young as it stands, vital to have someone like Castro in the squad. So it's fantastic that he's managed to sort out any disputes he had with Perth and join us back for the coming season.
Now, Stephen, you're obviously a Sydney FC fan, so you might not have had a great in-focus look at Perth, but from a fan point of view or a neutral point of view, what did you expect from Perth in this ACL? And then what can you take away based on these results here? Did they par for the course? Were they better or worse than you thought they might have been?
No, I think it's right around par. Perth weren't exactly expected to do well, and that showed in the results. What Nick mentioned, essentially treated it like a preseason camp, and I think that's exactly what it was. I think Richard Garcia wanted to see exactly what he had, get some of the veterans up to speed. It is great to see Castro back. Given what happened over the towards the end of last season, not returning, COVID, so it's good to see him back, get up to speed. He's slotted right back into the squad. I don't think there's too much to take away from it other than Richard Garcia wanting to see exactly what he had and getting them set for the upcoming season and try to make a crack at the title.
Well, now, so you've both mentioned Richard Garcia. Obviously, he's taking over the manager job from Tony Popovic, who departed for Greece. Previously, he was an assistant with Perth last year, and prior to that, he also managed their youth side. He also played for the Glory. and he is a former Socceroo, of course, as well. Nick, what have you noticed with his lineups so far? Does it look like that he's going to sort of carry on from where Popovic left off, or have you noticed anything in terms of a different playing style or anything at all yet?
It was a bit of a surprise to see them line up in a four at the back system across this entire campaign, especially as Popovic, he was a big fan of the three at the back system. And I remember there was an interview with one of the players saying that Garcia's favorite setup is a five at the back. So to see a four-man defense come up was quite a bit of a surprise, but it was good to see also. I think we've also got the similar themes with obviously very much based around Fornaroli dropping deep. He's so good at just receiving the ball to feet and looking to hold up the play as his teammates make their way up the pitch. And you've got players such as Steins and Bafford, who just always keen to make runs at the top of the pitch. I think in one of the recent games, which one was it? Against Shanghai, their movement was fantastic. Whenever they got the ball in the final third of the pitch, you just have players rotating around, making diagonal runs, coming back, resetting, just making runs. So I think, it would be really good to see what Perth can do in the upcoming season, especially when they get some of their more senior players back.
Well, you also touched on that Shanghai game as well. That has to be up there for probably one of the craziest games we saw in the Champions League. They were up 2-0 at one stage before conceding 3 goals in 11 minutes to fall behind 3-2. Neil Kilkenny scored a penalty late on to bring it back, and then I think there was a red card late on in the game as well. It was pretty crazy. Did you see any highlights or anything from it, Stephen?
No, I think that was one of the few games I haven't had a chance to check the highlights of, and it sounds like I need to go back any match of that one.
Well, I did the same thing. I was like, Perth, I won't watch this one, because I'd watched quite a few. I'll give this one a miss, and then I checked the score like the next day, and so it was 3-3, and stuff was exploding all over the place. I was like, Murphy's Law, right? The one game you don't watch is just happens to be the most exciting one.
Just on that one. In that game, I think one of the other takeaways from that game is it's notable that all the goals that were scored were from set pieces. First of all, you had Fornaroli score a free kick, then Armiento came on and scored another free kick, and the final one was a Neil Kilkenny penalty, as you mentioned. So as exciting as their movement has been, we haven't really seen that cutting edge. I suppose that's a similar thing to Sydney. And also at the back, you've obviously got a very young centre-back pairing who haven't had too much time to play with each other. And some of the goals, I think, some of the centre-back positioning could have been a bit better. But you know what? It was a great game to watch.
And so, again, recapping and looking at Perth Glory's campaign as a whole, Nick, what were you expecting from them? And do you think are they going to be disappointed that they lost 5 out of 6 games, or did they just totally write it off as a preseason thing? Like, from a Perth point of view, do you just say this is a totally failed campaign, or have you seen positives that you think Perth will be able to carry on into the upcoming A-League season?
Yeah, I don't know. When you first look at the squad that they submitted for the Champions League, and you saw, not a lot of names were very recognizable. Obviously, Fornaroli, Castro, and a few of the other older players. But one of the key themes was obviously they were a very young squad, academy players, new signings. So it was clear from the start that it was going to be, I suppose, written off from a competitiveness point of view. But in terms of a preseason point of view, it's just fantastic. We've been able to see some of their up-and-comers that we'll hopefully see in their A-League squad soon.
Well, and another question for you, Stephen, is we saw Perth earlier on in the season announce that they'd signed Andrew Nabbout and Nathaniel Atkinson, only for them to then not end up joining the club.
It's peak A-League. Obviously there was the border restrictions in place at the time, and
in terms of negatives, I suppose it's difficult to be too negative about the entire campaign. I got one. How about the tape incident on when there was blood on the shirt of I think it was Nick Walsh? That was a bit of a farce. That was hilarious, though.
It's a little bit of blood. Just let him play with it. God.
Well, I'm glad you brought it up, Nick, because I was going to bring it up right at the end. It just wouldn't be an Aussie team playing in the Asian Champions League with some sort of tape that needs to go over. Well, normally it's like a sponsor, or what was it, Brisbane Roar? They had to retape their numbers on the back as they were peeling off. So it's nice to know that, 2020, Stephen, you said it's been a crazy year, but it's nice to know that some things are eternal, and that is Aussie sides in the Asian Champions League needing tape on their kits. Stephen, just a quick one. Have you got any positives or negatives that you sort of see for Perth Glory?
So the positives for me is, following on what Nick said, a lot of the youth has been given a chance over the Asian Champions League campaign. It shows that there's a bright young future coming through at Perth, and maybe the trends continue towards the whole of the league, which is a good thing. We need to be better at developing players. And as teams are getting more and more history, this can only continue, which should only be a good thing, and might actually allow some teams to compete if they can develop youth players into solid veterans, or be able to sell them overseas for a transfer fee. So it brings more money into the football economy, and that can only help strengthen the game as a whole.
Well, that sort of wraps up our take on Perth Glory. It does sound like there are some positives, some things to look forward to, despite a winless Asian Champions League campaign. We're going to take another quick break before we jump into our Hall of Fame winner from last week. Okay, so taking a look back at the Hall of Fame last week, we had some more Ripper nominations, but the winner of the coveted place, in the reserve team Hall of Fame is Ellen Borean. She was the bride who got married and then went to an NPL Queensland finals match in her wedding dress. Ellen, I believe, is a football player herself, and her then husband was playing in goals for, I think it was Lions FC in the NPL Queensland. She received the most votes, and she has earned a coveted place in the reserve team Hall of Fame. Congratulations, Ellen. I mean, this has to go right up there with any sort of wedding feelings, I reckon, as well. A spot in the reserve team Hall of Fame goes right up there with a wedding ring, I reckon. Looking back into it now, taking a look at the final team in our Asian Champions League review and wrap-up, the Melbourne Victory. We've saved probably the biggest, craziest, best. There's lots of adjectives we could use to describe their campaign for last. The Melbourne Victory are on through to the knockout stages thanks to a crucial win over FC Seoul. Marco Rojas and Jake Brimmer scored for the Victory over Seoul. Seoul were able to pull one back in the second half, but Melbourne hung on and advanced to the knockout stages. Boys, what do we think of this? The Victory looks sort of nowhere for a lot of the ACL, and all of a sudden they're playing on in the knockout stages of the Champions League. What do you think of that, Nick?
Yeah, how crazy is that? I suppose based on the performances that you'd seen in the previous games, you didn't really have too many high hopes for that. But, look, as it turns out, the 3 points that they won back in February are just so key.
And Stephen, what are your impressions of the Victory as a Sydney FC fan? They're not exactly your most favourite club, but they finished 10th on the ladder, and they managed to finish 10th on the table in the A-League last season, and they make it out of the group stage. But Sydney, reigning premiers, reigning champions can't get out. What do you take on? What do you think of that?
Oh, that was poorly timed.
I think that might have been perfectly timed. What do you think of that? Melbourne Victory in the group stage. It's given Stephen a fit. That seems appropriate to me, I think. Don't worry, mate. As a City fan, I feel you. That was my reaction too. I saw the score and I watched the game. Sorry, and when the full-time whistle blew, that I was similarly, I don't know, incapacitated, I suppose you could say. What do you think of it?
Okay, so as a Sydney FC fan, I am obligated to decry any achievements by Melbourne Victory.
Of course.
For the same reasons that Sydney should have advanced out of the group, for the same reasons that Melbourne Victory should have failed. It's in a hub. It's in Qatar. It's pre-season. Blah 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 blah. As far as the actual achievement goes, well done to Victory. It's a good thing for Australian football. We need the Australian teams to be doing well, if only so it gets the AFC off Australia's back. It's it's good. Now, personally, I want to see Melbourne Victory get trounced in the very next game, and get sent home much earlier than I think they would like. But if they do, as long as they don't win the thing, just do not win the thing. The last thing we need is the Wanderers and Victory having won the Asian Championship before Sydney does. It's the last thing we need. Just do not win it. Don't win it.
This is dangerous territory. Sorry, this is dangerous territory for Sydney FC fans. Your two biggest rivals winning arguably the Asia's biggest footballing crown, while you guys are just languishing down, as our fact checkers correctly pointed out, down the bottom of the group. Gee whiz, I mean, I'm not a Victory fan either, but I think everyone in the A-League who isn't a Sydney fan would like to see Sydney endure maybe a little bit more annoyance and discomfort. So maybe we're going to have to hop on the Victory bandwagon. Nick, you watched the game. What were your takeaways from what was a remarkable performance from the Victory and, frankly, an incredible result?
It was crazy. I suppose they managed. It was insane. I suppose.
Yeah.
You just need to look at the stats, and the possession stats are what Seoul had 70% possession, Melbourne Victory had 30% possession. In terms of expected goals, Seoul had 2.7, and Melbourne Victory had 1.19. So
nice.
I mean,
and even just chiming in as well. Not some of the other shots. Seoul had 24 shots to the Victory's 5. Seoul had 9 shots on target. The Victory had 2 shots on target, 2 goals. It's not too bad.
Yeah, it's pretty absurd. And it definitely, as you watch the game, as it went past the 60th minute or whenever it was that Seoul scored, you just felt like, oh my God, it's going to happen again. And we saw it happen to Perth. We saw it happen to Sydney. We saw it happen to Victory. It's going to happen. They're going to concede. But they didn't. And yeah, look where we are.
Well, Rojas's goal as well, I think it was in the first 5 minutes. That was class. He's sort of, I think we can say he underperformed last year with the Victory. I think there was a lot of hype around him. The whole team, to be frank, sort of underperformed a bit, but that was sublime from him and just sort of shows the class that he still possesses. And once again as well, the Victory with VAR, they won the grand final against Newcastle because VAR didn't work, and I believe there was a shout for a handball as well that wasn't spotted and wasn't called. Stephen, you're shaking your head. Did you see the incident?
I did not see the incident. Just I try to put every memory of that final series out of my mind.
We're bringing back unwanted memories here.
Yep.
So taking a look overall then, the Victory somehow make it out of the group. They're the first Aussie team to make it to the knockout stages since 2016. They'll face Ulsan Hyundai in the next round. It's crazy to think that Sydney FC, premiers and champions last year. Perth made the semi-finals in the final series last year. Neither of them got out of the group. The Victory finished 10th, had their worst campaign that they've ever had in the A-League. Go over to this hub, new manager, new everything, and somehow end up advancing, getting out of the knockout stages, and it's huge. So, Nick, what are some of the takeaways and things that you noticed? Watching the Victory overall, not just this Seoul game, but overall throughout this campaign.
Yeah, I suppose it's difficult to be a bit too harsh on them. In the first game, you had 5 new signings. And Falami and Ryan, they literally just joined the squad, I think, a week before that game. So obviously they were going to take a bit of time to gel and get up to speed. Aside from that, I think it was quite interesting to see some of the positions that we had people playing. One thing that was very particularly interesting was you frequently had a midfielder playing up front just behind the striker. In the first 2 games, there was Birkin Kurda, and then you had Brimmer in there, and then you had Barnett play in that role also. I think it's that role is going to be very key for Melbourne Victory in terms of how they'd like to press. It's a very energetic press that they have from the front. They front load a lot of players up there, so it's going to be very important for them to manage to fit someone energetic enough to play in that role. In terms of attack, I suppose it's been a bit muted. Obviously, we're waiting for Rudy Gested to arrive up front for them, so that'll be a huge boost. But I suppose aside from that, a lot of the games that we saw from them, it was very much a very defense-first approach, and kind of just hoping that they could get long balls on for players like Rojas, Falami, and McManaman on the right-hand side to run onto.
So you mentioned some of those, tactical changes or players playing in different positions. Obviously, the Victory, like Perth, have a new manager in Grant Brebner. What can we sort of take away from these games looking at his managerial style? Is there anything that you think will drastically change with the Victory for their formation or some of those changes that you mentioned?
Yeah, so I actually had a look at Grant Brebner when he was caretaker manager towards the end of last season. And I think a few of the things, the key concepts that he has are quite similar. You've got the 4-2-3-1 formation that he's keeping. You've got the fairly high press that he likes. And you've got players who like to come inside into central areas to combine with the fullbacks going up on the outside to provide that width. It'll be interesting to see how he incorporates Rudy Gested into that. Yeah, that'll just be very interesting to see. I also think that they've managed to sign quite a lot of good players. They've got a lot of depth up front in terms of the wing players. They've got Falami, Laurie Latanzio, Rudy Gested, Robbie Cruz, who's still at home, Marco Rojas. So they've got, and of course Elvis Campsova. So they've got a lot of depth at the front and on the wings. So it'll be interesting to see how Grant Brebner manages to chop and change the squad just to make sure they've got the right balance of players in his formations. And if you look further back in midfield, I think...
Stephen, you sort of mentioned... Oh, sorry, go for it.
And I think if you look further back in midfield...
No, go for it, I think...
Okay, sorry. Anyway, if you look further back in midfield, I think with the signings of Brimmer, you've got Barnett, who's playing really well, and Butterfield obviously coming in. I think there'll be a bit of a challenge there because I feel they're a bit light on in that area, especially if one of the midfielders has to go forward to help with the press. And Lee Broxham will also have to... I get the feeling that Lee Broxham will also see some time at the fullback because they don't have too much depth there. So one of my questions would be how they manage the midfield area, specifically the defensive midfield area.
Stephen, a question for you. You mentioned earlier if you took your Sydney FC hat on and put your your Australian footballing hat on, that it's so important that an Australian team made it out of the group stages. Why do you think that is?
Okay, so I think that Australian football as a whole is looked down upon by Asian teams and by the AFC, and that's something that needs to improve, and the only way that's going to improve is by Australian teams doing well in the Asian Champions League, as well as the Australian national team continuing to do well. I think this campaign for Melbourne Victory so far, if you look back at last season, it was really a transition year. Muscat had been at the club basically since its inception. For him to then go on to Belgium, where he's recently been sacked. They had Marco Kurz come in from Adelaide, who just never really quite seemed to fit in to what the Victory ethos was and what they wanted to do. And so now you got Grant Brebner coming in, who took over a little bit towards the end of last season, and he's had a full preseason. They're into the knockout stage of the Champions League. I think the Victory. I think you'll look at last season as kind of an anomaly overall when you look at Melbourne Victory's history, and they'll be back. They'll at least make the finals this year, barring a complete collapse, and maybe Brebner's not the person for the job if that happens. But in which case, then you have to look at it. You've had 3 managers in 2 seasons. Where do you go from there?
Yes, some good points there. Nick, this result has really sort of flipped the script for the Victory and the whole outlook we have on their campaign. Taking a look back at their results so far as a whole, prior to this result, they only had 1 win and 1 draw and 3 losses heading to this. So the fact that they've managed to win this game and advance to the knockout stage really sort of changes the whole perspective that we can sort of take from this. How far can the Victory go? How deep of a run can they make? Can you see them getting past Ulsan Hyundai? Can they pull off a Wanderers?
I don't know. We saw Ulsan Hyundai play against Perth, was it? And they were clearly the dominant side. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw. Actually, on that being said, Perth, they did manage to shut them out until very late in the games when Ulsan Hyundai scored. So I suppose I would 100% expect that to be the case for Melbourne Victory going forward into the next few games, focusing on a much more compact defense, looking to break really quickly with a Rojas, a Falami, or someone else with pace.
Well, taking a look as well, the fact that they've made it out, do you think the Victory are punching above their weight here by the fact that they've advanced? Or as Stephen sort of touched on there as well previously, do you think that this just sort of shows how much of a flash in the pan last year was in terms of, their poor performances, and that they're actually trending rather quickly back in the right direction?
Yeah, I think obviously they've had a lot of recruitment, right? You've got a lot of depth where they didn't have in the previous season. And it certainly looks like the players are firing on all cylinders at this stage. They have rode their luck a fair bit in some of the games. Well, obviously against Seoul as the prime example. They also, I would argue that they got a bit unlucky against Chiang Rai to only draw. But against Beijing, you'd absolutely expect them to lose those two games. And you wouldn't take too much out of that.
Stephen, how deep do you want to see the Victory go?
I think I mentioned it earlier.
It's a very conflicted answer.
I want them to get absolutely trounced in the game against Ulsan. As a Sydney FC supporter, as an Australian football supporter, they need to go deep. We want our Australian teams to be doing well, regardless of where our club loyalties lie. As Australian football goes, we need to see the teams doing well, and if Victory are our best chance of doing that, then so be it.
That sounded very, very, very painful. We might have to bump the levels up on that one and record.
Very forced.
Yeah, we might have to play that back to you a couple of times, or it might give you nightmares. Maybe not. Maybe you'll never come on a podcast again. If we have to make you talk. We might get you on for a Western Sydney show or something like that, where you have to relive some of their greatest games, and it'll be very, very sad, very, very gloomy. Stephen having to praise his biggest rivals. Nick, so again, as I said, this really has flipped the script. What's the biggest positive and the biggest negative for the Victory? And obviously, the biggest positive might still be yet to come. But at time of recording, what's the biggest positive so far, and the negative? Sorry.
Yeah, sure. I suppose we've been able to see their new signings integrate very well. Callum McManaman, he started a bit slowly in his first few games, but against Seoul, he was on fire. He was close control, dribbling, and all that. But not just him; it's also good to see the whole team working together quite well. I think there's definitely a little bit of fluency that they still need, but it's still very promising, especially from a new centre-back pairing, for which chemistry really comes difficult and slowly for. In terms of negatives, I don't want to be too harsh, but I do think there's a bit of... I don't think Grant Brebner's really got his first 11 sorted yet. I think in terms of midfield, he needs to find that balance between defensive solidity and possession retention, as well as progression. But I'm still very keen to see what Grant Brebner can do with his squad, and obviously would like to see them get quite far in the competition.
Stephen, I'm going to throw the same question to you, but to give you a little bit of an out, I'm going to give you the question, but from an Australian football perspective. So as a whole, for Australian football, all three teams combined, what's the biggest positive and the biggest negative for this ACL campaign?
So I actually want to just praise Victory for a moment here. I think the positive that comes out of their campaign as a whole is that the team's actually looking good. As much as I don't want to say it, anything can happen once you hit the knockout stages, and the fact that they're working well together shows they might actually be in with half a chance of going deep. And so I think that's a good segues nicely into the positive for Australian football, is that we have a team in the knockout stages of the Asian Champions League that actually has half a shot of repeating the successes of Adelaide and Wanderers in terms of going deep, and in terms of the latter actually winning the whole thing. I think the negatives of the Asian Champions League campaign as a whole for the Australian teams is that it just didn't seem to click early on, and it cost Sydney their spot, just not being able to click, not being able to finish. it was just looked at, I guess, maybe as a preseason tournament, and that's not the approach you need to be taking into continental competition.
Interesting. That's an interesting note to end on there, because that will sort of hint into our final segment. But before we jump into that, we do just want to take a quick break and jump into our Hall of Fame nominations for this week. Jumping back into it, there's quite a few people now in the reserve team Hall of Fame, but there's still plenty of room for more. And so what we're going to do now is throw out our nominations to see who will join that illustrious group. Stephen, I'm going to throw it to you. Who is your nomination to join the reserve team Hall of Fame?
So I'm very much going in the form of recency bias here, and I am going to nominate Neil Kilkenny's braces. If
Nice.
only for the joy and entertainment that it has given soccer Twitter over the last few days. Plus, who doesn't love a good Simpsons meme besides Bran over here? I don't get it. Why?
Well, I didn't realize this was such a sensitive topic here, so we'll keep it brief. Otherwise, this might just overshadow the whole podcast. But I'll be honest, I don't get it. I don't get them. You know, I think Simpsons hot take is Simpsons memes are the most overrated thing going around on Twitter at the moment. I just don't understand. I don't know. Maybe it's because I wasn't red hot into the Simpsons. I just, I see them around. I go, are these funny? I don't know. Other people seem to think so. So I'm willing to say that one might be on me. But yeah, I don't know. Simpsons memes just seem to go over my head. But so Neil Kilkenny's braces, though, that's your nomination?
Yes, I actually think that's a good answer. I think we can accept your explanation for not liking Simpsons memes.
Well, that's all right. You haven't kicked me off the podcast yet. That would have been a tough pill to swallow. Nick, who's your nomination?
I don't know. I've got half a mind to nominate your hatred for Simpsons memes for this one. But no, I'm going to go with...
Surely I'm not the only one who feels that way. Anyway, go ahead. Yep.
I'm going to go with goalkeeper Ryan Grant. We got to see him in action over, I think, last week. Stephen might have been a bit upset about seeing the red for the goalkeeper, but we all gained because we all got to see Ryan Grant in goals.
Well, a player in goals, who doesn't love that? And Stephen, I think Sydney tweeted after the game an interesting stat that Ryan Grant has now played in every position for Sydney FC. Is that correct?
Yes, they did. They did tweet that out after the game. As far as the red card goes, just to flash back on that quickly, I don't. As disappointing as it is, we did get Grant in goals, and being perfectly honest, that game was well away from Sydney at that point. There was no way they were going to get back and sneak in a point. So it's given us great content, and that's all you can ask for.
We were just unlucky that we didn't get to see him make a save. That would have been great. I would have after he scored a goal with one of his nipples in the grand final. I think it would have been great if he then saved.
It's in a Ryan Grant's left nipple.
Well, I think it would have been great for parody if he then saved a goal with the other nipple. I thought that sort of juxtaposition would have been quite good. But I'm jumping in for my Hall of Fame nomination. I have not got a single one. That's because Sean has dominated the Hall of Fame nominations. I think he hasn't lost one yet. All 5 of his nominations have gone in. I'm calling in the big guns, boys. My Hall of Fame nomination is Marvin. I reckon he has taken over the A-League, not just, soccer Twitter, the whole league by storm. His social media impact is massive. The Central Coast Mariners have really hit on a good one there. Marvin just seems to get it. He's meme-worthy. He's sort of, I guess you'd say, cute. I don't know if he's cuddly. I haven't felt him yet. He gives the impression that he'd be quite soft. He just provides excellent content. My favorite thing on Twitter as well, heaps of people follow him. He only follows one other account, and that's the Central Coast Mariners. And I love it. I think he is the best mascot in the league and very much deserving of a place in our Hall of Fame. Jumping back into our last segment now, we sort of hinted on it at the end of the victory discussion there, talking about the Asian Champions League as a pre-season for A-League teams. So whether or not that's a good thing or a bad thing, we just sort of want to take a look at that, and as well, which sort of teams can take the most away from this, sort of pre-season form into the upcoming A-League season. Nick, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think it's been unfortunate that it just so has happened that our teams have been in preseason for this. Obviously, the amount of preparation that they could have was minimal, and I think you could see that in some of the results that we saw. But yeah, aside from that, I think it's just fantastic that the guys get some really really quality teams that they can test themselves against in the for preseason.
Well, and taking a look as well for the new coaches as well, that's got to be a huge plus for guys like Richard Garcia and Grant Brebner, who in normal situations, the only preseason games that they would be playing would probably be against NPL teams. That the Victory had already played one closed-door friendly with Melbourne City. Sydney played the Olyroos. So as far as, getting information on your playing group, your style, how to implement all that, that's got to be immeasurable. Actually going up against, Nick, as you said, high quality opponents and great looking teams. Stephen, do you think that's got to be a huge advantage for the Victory in Perth this upcoming season?
Yeah, I think it is. It's usually all intra-squad NPL teams. Or just interleague preseason friendlies, as you mentioned. So yeah, getting to play against high quality continental opposition can only help. The young, looking at Perth, these are valuable competitive minutes you're getting into youth members of the squad who probably have not had it against this level of opposition. And in the case of Diego Castro and Bruno Fortaroli, haven't had it in quite some time against this level of opposition, particularly in the case of Castro as he's coming off a long layoff because of all the COVID issues. As far as Victory goes, they're into the that's just more valuable experience for them. Moving ahead slightly to Sydney, they got a chance again to get some competitive minutes into the youth players who wouldn't have had these experiences before. It's shown that they can slot in and out of their rigid 4-2-2-2 system, regardless of who's coming in, who's coming out. And so just finding more time to gel against a competitive opposition is just going to help all three of the A-League teams in their upcoming campaign.
Nick, taking a look at some of the playing styles that we saw during the ACL, what did you take away from that? Because it seems like some teams sort of played in a way that mirrored the way that they want to play this upcoming A-League season. Do you reckon that sort of lends sort of credit to the idea that the ACL is a bit of a pre-season tournament for some of these teams?
Yeah, absolutely. As Stephen mentioned, Sydney just went right back to their normal setup, and they've got some valuable minutes in there for preparation for the upcoming season. I think Perth is a bit of an anomaly in the sense that I don't think they had the full complement of players that they would have liked to have had. So I wouldn't be surprised. And of course, a lot of the players who have come in are new to the first team environment. So I wouldn't be surprised if when we get back into the A-League that they do change up how they play. For Melbourne Victory, I think they've had the opportunity to kind of gel their new members of the squad in. And I think their style of play is actually perfectly suited for tournament football, especially against better opposition. They definitely have to keep it tight at the back, but then they have to be looking forward and figuring out how to break out against these oppositions who are likely going to have more of the ball against them.
Stephen, what do you think? What sort of advantage, do you think Sydney will get from the ACL in the preseason compared to other teams? So 2020's been crazy, with COVID, everything, the lockdown, the break in the season, the extended sort of shortened off season, everything that's going on at the moment. Is it going to be a huge advantage for Sydney FC and of course Perth and the Victory that they've had this opportunity to play highly competitive games, whereas other teams like, Macarthur, Melbourne City, Western Sydney, every other team simply haven't, where they have to sort of make do with sort of strange intra-club matches or strange sort of 3-half friendlies with other A-League teams?
Yeah, I think that this is definitely going to be a huge advantage for the three A-League teams. As Nick mentioned, they've been able to sort of work out what they want out of their systems. In the case of Victory and Perth, Sydney were just able to jump right back into it. We saw against the Olyroos, it didn't look like they'd missed a beat, and then they go then they go over to Qatar and lose a very competitive game against Shanghai. But they did get better as the campaign has gone on. Getting those valuable minutes for youth players is going to be, especially we've seen the schedule release is just a bit more condensed than it usually is. Midweek games, a lot of 3 games in 8 days situations for some of the teams. So when it gets to the pointy end of the season, particularly if we don't know what's going to happen with next season's Asian Champions League campaign, but if it goes back to normal where it's midweek games again, then getting these valuable minutes in now and finding out exactly what you have in your youth players is going to be invaluable experience for all 3 A-League teams, especially when you look at this campaign. Sydney, introduced Neuenhoff to a wider audience, and he's been an absolute gem to uncover. So I think the more Sydney can do that, the better. And so I just think overall it's been a very solid preparation for the upcoming campaign, and hopefully it pays dividends. And we have a highly competitive competition this year, as long as Sydney finish on top, of course.
Nick, same question for you. What do you think? Is it going to be a huge advantage for those teams having played those highly competitive games in the pre-season, or do you think it's not really going to make much of a difference once the A-League season eventually kicks off?
I think it does help, particularly in terms of understanding the weaknesses in your own systems. So frequently what we see in the beginning of seasons is you'll see teams try and play a certain style, and then as they go along through the weeks, they manage to tweak, make minor adjustments to make sure that their system works in a good way. I think the competitiveness of these fixtures has ensured they're able to have a closer look at how their teams will do under heavy scrutiny. Something that you don't necessarily get against NPL sides who, in all fairness, they don't necessarily have the same level of quality that can test a Sydney or a Melbourne Victory in preseason games. In terms of fitness, I suppose it remains to be seen how the whole quarantine process goes for the teams. Perth, obviously, I think they're just hanging out in a hotel, but I think Sydney and Melbourne Victory, they managed to be able to train together. So it really remains to be seen how the fitness component goes, because obviously all the other squads in the A-League will have had this entire time to work on their fitness.
Well, it'll be an interesting one as well when we talk about the Victory. We talked about how mega it is, the fact that they've made it out of the group. If they keep ticking along and if they sort of make it further down the group stages, all of a sudden this preseason tournament could start impacting quite significantly on the regular season. So it's going to be an interesting one to see how that plays out. But a final question for both of you on this one, and we'll start with you, Nick. From a preseason perspective, if we're looking overall, as the ACL was predominantly for these sides, more of a preseason hit out, who has the most positives to take away from this Asian Champions League campaign?
On the balance of things, I guess you'd have to say Melbourne Victory. Not only have they progressed, they're the only squad who've progressed, but they've also managed to integrate their team, their new signings into the team. So from that point of view, it's really a perfect preseason for Melbourne Victory.
And for you, Stephen, who do you think has the most positives? And then we'll follow it up with a Sydney FC question in terms of what you think their biggest positives as well from a preseason are.
So as Nick said, it seems like Melbourne Victory is the obvious answer. But I think that depends exactly on how deep they go into this tournament, because if they go deep, like semi-final stage, does it impact their regular season? Will fixtures have to be pushed back, rescheduled, moved around because of the quarantine periods have to be served? And in which case, then do they end up maybe having to play a couple more of those 3 games in 7 days slots, especially towards the back end of the season, which could have a bit of an impact, especially as we know A-League sides can't exactly carry big squads because of the salary cap issues, and so there'll be a lot of cramming people in that, maybe instead of being able to give them a break, they don't get that chance. So I'm going to shift that over to Perth. They were able to, relatively young squad, were able to get a lot of minutes, the competitive minutes into their youth players, which will only help their development. And under Richard Garcia, they were able to learn exactly what Garcia wants as a coach, in terms of the first team, and hopefully that translates over into the domestic campaign.
Too easy, gentlemen. Well, that pretty much brings us to the end of our Asian Champions League wrap off. Thank you for joining me and for chatting all things Asian Champions League. Nick, if people want to get any more of your content, where can they find you?
Obviously, first of all, on the reserve team, or on Twitter, I'm at aleague_apart, or my personal blog is at aleagueapart.com.
Fantastic. And for you as well, Stephen, you've already got quite a few articles up on the reserveteam.com.au. Where else can people go to get more of your content?
So you can, my best place is on Twitter at PalettiStephen.
Thank you again for tuning in, guys. Don't forget to head to the reserveteam.com.au to check out all of our fantastic content. There's a whole bunch of great stuff on there on Australian football, New Zealand football, grassroots, kits, whatever you like, we've got it covered. Don't forget to like or subscribe to our YouTube channel. It does make a difference as well. Chime in on the comments as well if there's anything you agree with, disagree with. We'd love to hear from you, and we look forward to chatting to you next time.